do you care if the Vols win ugly with defense? Not at all. 80%, just a little bit at about 20%. Will, what do you make of that? And just in general, the fan expectations. You talk to Tennessee fans all the time. Are Tennessee fans okay with winning ugly? Should they be?
Yeah, they are. I would say this: you shouldn't be, because that falls into the winning is a great deodorant situation. Points are king in this era of football. You tell me the last team that was great winning simply with defense. Even Kirby had to go get Todd Monk and open things up. And last year they had a record-setting offense, and they still were conservative in some games, and it was enough to bite them. To be elite. Now, if you just want to be good, I think Mark Stoops has proven you can just be good with really physical players by winning with defense, ball control, and all of those things. Who's great that's not trying to score 40 a game? You have to be trying to score 40 a game. Points are king. And so I think if you do it, it's a very short-term strategy. I don't think it's a strategy. It's a tactic. And I would want to be strategic, not tactical, when it comes to the way that I want my football program to perform. Now, in the short term, again, though, this week, if you win with defense, you win with defense. It's fine. Oklahoma, you didn't have to do anything because their offense is terrible and Brent Venables isn't a good coach. And then NC State, you will change Rob and I's offense when he's in the casket. He ain't changing it for his players. So it made sense to do it in those games, in my opinion, and I didn't have a problem with it. If that's your game plan long term, it is impossible for you to be elite. And I think with Tennessee being the number 4 team in the nation, you're trying to be elite, right?
Yes, no doubt. Let me. Is Michigan, would they be an anomaly last year, because they were primarily ground-based defense? They weren't lighting people up, so to speak.
Yeah, no, and they were trying to win at the line of scrimmage. I don't know that they were trying to win with defense, right? They were trying to win along the line of scrimmage. So they were running the football a lot. Now, when you have those players and the opponent's playbook, it usually helps matters. You probably can be able to run the ball. I've always said this: if you have the mid-90s Cowboys offensive line, then yeah, you can go pound the rock and win a lot. But kids don't block like that anymore. That's just not the thing. And we watched last year. How many times did we see teams last year of these coaches before the season? We're going to be more balanced this year. We're going with more 12 personnel. We're going to and the games get more compacted. And all of them either had to get away from it, or they got fired, or they're on the hot seat right now for trying to do that. Even Nick Saban last year, Jalen Milroe say that they would walk in with he hires a West Coast offense guy. We're going to ground and pound, and Saban at the half would have to go change the offensive game plan to fit what they could do, because that's just not how you win in football. And talking to some people in the high school game and in the recruiting game, and even some parents of players who played themselves, all of them say, dude, that's because none of them block like that. Like, no one has their hand in the dirt anymore in high school football. So it takes a long time to develop an offensive line where you can win that way. Michigan just kind of called lightning in a bottle, and COVID years helped that.
Will, may I offer this, since you mentioned him? We have a new viewer who commented on the program. It was like the middle of the night. My phone went off. No joke.
Yes.
Apparently Connor Stalions is out there commenting, and I guess he likes Dave and Caleb. So maybe we can get some game plans for him.
Look, okay, well, what do you guys feel about Connor Stalions? Because I will just tell you, there's someone that we all know, all of us, that has told me, when I was on Tennessee staff, I used to work at the other staff, and I would just sit and read their signals and whisper it into the offensive coordinators. And I would just whisper into his ear, this is what they're about to run. And now that's different than we're going to video it, and we're going to go full on Belichick, and we're going to match it up with your signals on the sideline and all of those things. How big of a deal is it to know that? Because some players I've seen say, oh, it's no big deal at all. Everybody knows what everybody's doing. Everybody knows beforehand if you're going to run or pass. It's not a big deal. Is that a big deal to you guys? I look at to me, it's the conspiracy more so than just the act.
Yes, it's Jim Harbaugh thumbing his nose knowing he was going to the NFL and saying, I don't care what you do, NCAA. I thought two things stood out about Connor Stalions, and that was in that documentary. One, I believe he was a bit of a savant. I think he saw the play calls really quickly. And two, I understand the NCAA rule why you can't travel, because smaller schools can't do that. That's primarily what stood out to me. But do you think that affected the Tennessee-South Carolina game?
Yeah, 100%. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. in the absence of any other evidence, that's the one thing that seems to make sense to me is that I think, and do I know? No. I'm not saying it happened. No. Do I think there's a real possibility that that was what happened in that game? Yeah, I do. Didn't make any sense watching so much South Carolina. I'd watched every South Carolina game leading up to that game, but I always do that. Whoever Tennessee plays, I watched all of their games. And if I have time, I'll watch it twice. You get later in the season, it becomes more difficult. But it did not make sense what Tennessee had done, what South Carolina had done. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. But I do buy that there were also all of the issues in the locker room ahead of time, just because I was told that by so many players on that team, that there were legitimate James Banks, Hendon Hooker beef, Joe Milton stepping in and choking James Banks out. Like I believe all those things did happen, just because a lot of people that don't really hang out with each other would have to be lying to me and all saying exactly the same story. But I do think there's a very real possibility that South Carolina had Tennessee's play calls.
Interesting. What the H brought to you by the Hemp House, the premier hemp dispensary online with a wide variety, great selection, and strict standards to ensure you only receive the best in CBD or Delta products. Hemp House Chat with 2Ts.com. Hemp House Chat with 2Ts.com. Link down below. Use the promo code HOOKED. That's HOOKED for 10% off. Caleb?
So getting back to the concept of Tennessee winning ugly, I want to know y'all's thoughts about this, because we all were in college. Well, I may have been. Well, I don't know when you were in college, but I know Dave was
a long time,
early 2000s. Yeah.
Okay, so Will, you were right when it happened, and Dave, you were before it. But okay, let's talk a little history of Tennessee just as the college for a minute, because Tennessee, they instituted the lottery scholarship in 2003, and this is relevant where I'm going, guys. It became a much more international school after that, and it's a much less localized school now than it was 25, 30 years ago when Tennessee was in their heyday as a football program. There's a lot of students that have come through the school since then that knew nothing about Tennessee football, that were not fans in the 90s and the 2000s, that have only seen Tennessee during the decade and the era of dysfunction. Danny White is a marketing guy. You see that with his hire of Kim Caldwell. He is hiring to put butts in the seats with offense. Let's just call it what it is. Is it important for Tennessee to win entertainingly just to win over this new crop of students that have come through and only seen dysfunction for 20, 25 years and that are going to keep coming into the school?
I don't know that it is necessarily, because if you're winning, people show up, right? Like everybody front runs to some extent, right? Like right now, I dread Sundays watching the Giants play football because they are hot garbage. But when they're winning, I don't care how they're winning. The same guy, I'm yelling about Danny Dimes 2 years ago, and this year I'm like, if you don't get this guy off of my television right now, I'm going to vandalize my own property. So I think that people show up if you win or not. But I will. The thing that I think Danny White tries to do is he realizes if you have offense, one, you get fan base, you get money, you're not behind, you get interest, you get those things. Kids like it more. It becomes easier in recruiting for you to be able to sell the. Again, he's a marketing guy. He's marketing his program not just to the students, not just to the boosters, not just to the fan base, but also to the kids, to players, to potential recruits, to television networks. And offense sells. I also think it's one of the things Nick Saban said a few weeks ago, on the Sports Center before game day. Splash plays, cover up, or close the gap, or close a talent gap. And I think that for Tennessee, if you're looking at it saying we don't have the talent that Alabama does, then what do? You need a decided schematic advantage. Lady Vols don't have the same talent because they got so far behind in NIL when it comes to the way. Look, for the long time, Lady Vols, we're not going to pay basketball players to come here. Well, UConn and South Carolina are, so good luck, right? So they fell way behind. To me, this is now that they are going to use NIL to be able to pay basketball players. This is a way for you to close that talent gap, but it also is a way for people to pay attention to your product, because kids will look at that and say, oh, that's fun. I want to be a part of that. Oregon, how many kids were Oregon fans and went to Oregon because of what Chip Kelly was doing and how fun that offense was and all the uniforms and stuff like that? Like, it just kind of creates hype. I don't think there's as much sizzle around Colorado football if Prime wasn't running air raid. So if you know what I mean, if he was trying to run the ball 50 times a game, throw it 20, if he was doing what Mike Elko's doing at A&M, I don't think there's a whole lot of sizzle to what's going on there. A&M now better than they were when Johnny, in that Sumlin era. But in the Sumlin era, they got more headlines just because they were an offensive team.
Okay, let me ask you this. And I mean this realistically, because Jimmy has reported before and on this show that Danny White likes points because it's easier to market high-scoring teams than it would be to, I don't know, market a Michigan program, despite the fact that they won and what they did last year. So do you think at any point, let's say Tennessee wins its next 2 games ugly, the 25-15 Oklahoma thing, do you think at any point Danny White would have the gall to go to Josh Heupel and say, good win? Be nice if you could score a few more points.
As long as you're winning, I think you're fine. Now, if you go get just look, because I'll be real, if you try to win with defense and ball control and running the football, Alabama's going to whoop your hind parts. Like that.
No, I agree.
Good, right? One, they have better players than you, so you can't say, well, we're going to slow the game down. They have better players than you. They're going to beat you down. 2, that Kalen DeBoer is good, right? Like that's what we saw Saturday until he decided to Jose Mourinho style park the bus. Was what happens when you give an elite. And if I was a Tennessee fan, I'd be happy about that. Not happy about an Alabama win, but seeing what happens when an elite offensive mind finally gets elite players, we've never seen that, right? So if you're looking at the way Tennessee's improving in recruiting, if I'm a Tennessee fan, I'm a little encouraged by how dominant Alabama could be, because I think that could be you in the coming years. That's something that I would pay attention to. But I think as long as he's winning, I don't think Danny White's going to say anything. But you start taking some L's and you're trying to win like Parcells did back in the day, yeah, he's gonna say something to you.
Okay, so Will, let's kind of reroute this, because I think when we're talking winning ugly, I think the perception meant like just winning by defense alone and like the old school 2000 Ravens. But like, no, let's talk winning ugly like we talked about with Michigan. When I think winning ugly, I mean ball control, but you're running the ball, you're scoring, but you're not running a lot of possessions because you're running the ball a lot. And say you may win a game like 24-14, but you only had 5 possessions and you scored on 4 of them. Does that count as winning ugly, and would that be okay?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I also don't think like one of the reasons I think Alabama and Georgia have been so dominant is Kirby and Saban drilled into their players' heads. It's so catch tackle is okay, run tackle is okay. I've spoken to I'll just tell you, the guy that kind of pointed it out to me the first time that I started asking other players about it was Eric Ainge, and he talked about when they played good teams that was just catch tackle. He's like, we weren't ready for that. Our guys were way too impatient, and they started freaking out because we didn't have splash plays. So a 4-yard gain, like Cut's telling us on the sideline, hey, no, 4-yard gain, good, take that. We're moving the chains. We're on schedule, and that's just not the way players are wired anymore, especially at the college level. The NFL level to take it, but the college level, they're not wired that way. But I do think so. I also think it's very hard to continuously win games like that, like the way, and even Michigan was in the 30s a lot. I think that you can win games with ball by using ball control 31-24. I think it's very difficult to continue to win games 23-13. And ball control, at some point in time, you're going to play somebody with better players than you and you lose. And that's just kind of what happens. Because I do think ball control comes down a lot to talent unless there's just a decided coaching advantage in one way or the other. And right now, while Tennessee's recruiting's improved, like if Tennessee won the national title this year, they'd be only the second team in the history of college football to do it that was not in the blue chip ratio. And that first team had Cam Newton. So, and I don't know that Cam Newton's walking through that door for Tennessee. Anybody like Cam Newton's on Tennessee's roster right now. So I think it could, the hypothetical, I think what you're saying is fair. I just don't know if that hypothetical can exist for Tennessee specifically. But I do think fans would accept it as long as there are wins there. Because most people are just following the ball, right? They're not paying attention to, well, why aren't you doing this? There's not a lot of that. Like I was watching that Alabama-Georgia game. I'm like, Kirby, why in the world are you staying in zone? I know you don't want Milroe to kill you running the football, but they're just eating you alive in this zone. Like Kalen DeBoer has you dead to rights, and you're just staying in the zone. I don't think most fans are paying attention to that necessarily. They're kind of following the ball, having a good time. It's social. Not that people don't know football, but when you don't work in it, you don't have to focus on it like that. And so I don't know that people are going to care a whole lot as long as you're getting dubs. Now, if you're winning like Beamer Ball 13-9, man, that's where the law of diminishing returns kicks in.